Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, David Cameron is in the Icelandic capital, Reykjavik, tonight. He's attending a meeting of the Northern Future Forum. That's a gathering of Northern European leaders. But his mind will be back at home on the coming EU referendum. He's using the meeting to warn Eurosceptics that any kind of EU associate status, like that of Norway, could lead to the worst of all worlds for Britain, with all the bills but no influence. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon, and a warning: his report does contain flash photography.
Nei 72%, ja 28%.
21 years ago, Norway voted no to joining the European Union. The final margin of victory was quite tight. David Cameron, just as he was setting off to meet the Norwegian Prime Minister, said Norway's life outside Europe, signing up to the rules with no say on drafting them, was a grim place to be.
Norway actually pays as much per head to the EU as we do. They actually take twice as many per head migrants as we do in this country. But of course, they have no seat at the table, no ability to negotiate. Now, I'm not arguing that all those who want to leave the EU say they want to follow the Norwegian path, but some do. And I think it's very important in this debate we absolutely are clear about the consequences of these different actions.
No one on our side of this debate is suggesting that we should be like Norway. Norway has a terrible deal with the EU. It's almost as bad as our deal. Between 2000 and 2009, Norway had to sign up to 9.1% of all EU regulation, over which they had almost no say. Rather like us, we had no say over those regulations, except we had to sign up to 100% of them. Like us, Norway doesn't get to control who comes into Norway. We don't have that say either.
Earlier this year, under pressure from Tories who want Britain to leave Europe, David Cameron decided he wouldn't be weighing in just yet on the whole Europe debate. He'd stay true to his mantra that he could end up on either side of the entire argument. But more recently, over the last few months, Tories attached to the In campaign have been warning Number 10 that support for Europe in this country is dangerously soft. And David Cameron has shifted to making the case for staying in. The Prime Minister's now in Reykjavik for his meeting with the Prime Minister of Iceland and leaders from Scandinavia and the Baltic republics. He repeated there his rejection of Norway's status outside the EU.
While they pay, they don't get a say. They don't have a seat round the table. They don't have a chance to influence the debate and get things done in Europe in the way that we do. So it's not a good option for Britain.
David Cameron still repeating the line he could come down on either side of this debate, but you don't hear him spelling out the negatives of staying in. Campaigners against EU membership insist Britain, as a major trading partner, could get a much better deal than smaller countries like Iceland or Norway. And the Prime Minister, they say, is getting partisan because he doesn't really believe his renegotiation will change much.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Norwegian Minister for European Affairs, Vidar Helgesen. I began by asking whether he thought David Cameron was being a little bit rude about Norway's arrangement.
Well, any country has to make up for itself what it wants to do. Norway has a very peculiar option, but it's tailored to Norwegian circumstances.
A former Norwegian foreign minister described it as Norway pay but get no say. I mean, is that how you see it?
Well, to a large extent, that's correct. We want to be part of the single market. We're not a member state, but being part of the single market is important for our economy and jobs. And that's why we accept all these laws coming from the EU without a right to vote and with very little say in the process.
What are the wider implications of Britain renegotiating, do you think? Is it a dangerous strategy for the wider EU?
We see it as important for the single market that Britain remains in. We think there will be better rules and legislation produced in the EU if Britain is at the table. For European security, which is increasingly dealt with, like in the Russia-Ukraine situation, around the European Union table, it's good for European security if Britain is at that table. So for Norway, we think Europe is simply more secure if Britain provides leadership within the European Union.
Which is a curious position for you to take, given that you're effectively outside it.
Yeah, but we're at the receiving end of EU laws, and therefore we have a great interest in how these laws come to be. And we think Britain has a free trade approach a less bureaucratizing approach than many other European Union countries. And that's why we think it's better for the European lawmaking if Britain is at the table rather than at the receiving end of EU legislation.
Do you think Mr. Cameron's strategy at the moment looks to be the right one?
I will not assess his strategy. I think what is important is for the issues to be laid out. And one of the issues that have come to surface in the British discussion is the Norwegian option. And I'm only explaining what that option is. It is up to the British people to determine whether it's good for them.
And if you were renegotiating now, would you still go for the Norwegian option, as it's called?
Well, the Norwegian option was negotiated back in 1992. Europe has moved on. There are a lot of things that are different today in Europe than then. So we're facing challenges in sticking to the same agreement when the EU is moving on. We're dealing with it, but it's increasingly complicated.
So would you like to renegotiate yourself?
Well, we're not sure we will get a better deal if we renegotiate.
But you'd like to try?
We prefer to stick to what we have and make adaptations along the way rather than leap into what would be quite uncertain.
Your last referendum was pretty close. I mean, would you dare to predict what ours might be?
Well, I think one of the Norwegian lessons is you don't predict referendum results.
Mr. Helgesen, thanks very much for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
Well, before he left for Iceland, David Cameron endured an uncomfortable time at Prime Minister's questions in the Commons. The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, asked 6 times for a promise that no one would be left worse off when the Chancellor came up with revised plans to reform the tax credit system. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, joins us live now from Westminster. Gary.
Jeremy Corbyn always said that he would alter his tactics in question time, and this time, as you say, he didn't go for the 6 different subjects, phoned in, written in, emailed in from different people around the country. He just stuck at the same subject, the same question very much. He wanted an assurance that after the defeat in the Lords on tax credits, would there be no impact at all on tax credit recipients once George Osborne had finished rethinking all the reforms. Here's a flavour of the exchanges.
Will he confirm right now that tax credit cuts will not make anyone worse off in April next year?
Prime Minister. What we want is for people to be better off because we're cutting their taxes and increasing their pay. But he's going to have to be a little patient because although these changes passed the House of Commons 5 times with ever-enlarging majorities, we will set out our new proposals in the autumn statement and he'll be able to study them.
So 6 times the question asked, 6 times the Prime Minister danced off and talked about something else. I think what you come away with is the very strong impression that the idea that impact will be removed completely for tax credit recipients is for the birds. I was talking to a Treasury spokesman as well about another idea that's been floated around, that somehow George Osborne would dip into the kitty, as it were, of the surplus and reduce that a bit, the planned surplus, maybe pull some of that in to patch up the handiwork as he's repairing his tax credit reforms. There seems to be a reluctance when you talk to people in the Treasury and Number 10 to go near that. George Osborne rushed round to a meeting of the 22 committee, the backbench committee of Tory MPs today, to show that he wasn't ducking their questions, the rest of it. It wasn't a very serious session. There were no bruises. Indeed, it was quite warm. But the overall impression you get from everybody is that this is very much work in progress. They don't even know what they're going to announce in the autumn statement. But I do come away thinking there will be pain.
Thanks, Gary.
I've been